Two fellow Canadians here, sitting down to talk some music.
That's what I'm talking about, brother.
So let me start off by asking you this. When it comes to the creative process, what is the spark that lights the fire for Devin Townsend?
It's always different, you know, like, I mean, without trying to be too flippant about it, I mean, it's just life, right? Like, I wrote a song about my cat dying at one point. I wrote an album because my son was born at one point. I wrote an album because a friend of mine got killed. You know what I mean? It's like, I wrote a song about an alien because I really like coffee. It's all like, I think a lot of it for me is just when there's something that is, I don't want to say interesting, but like a big thing happens, or a small thing, but a thing happens that makes me feel something. It's like those experiences seem like they can be illustrated with music in a sense. And so my motivation to do it is just because I feel like that was a significant moment for me. And if I make a song correctly about it, then other people can participate in that. And because I think that we're all cut from the same cloth, we're all pretty much alike in a lot of ways, the chances of other people relating to that is pretty high, right? So I guess that's it.
So how do you create such a light album, and no pun intended with Lightwork, but how do you create such a light album coming out of such a dark period of time?
Because it was already dark enough. You know, I mean, I get asked that on these interviews. They say they're expecting me to do something aggressive and hateful, I guess. But I guess going back to your prior question, everything's a reaction for me. So I'll react to something happening, and my reaction to my life being really dark is, I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't enjoy it. You know, it wasn't like, oh, this is fantastic, man. I am so glad that my life is brutal, like chaotic right now. It's not what I felt. My thought was like, man, it would be nice to not feel this way. Mm-hmm. So I wrote music with that in mind. I was like, I don't want to feel this way right now. And the thing that I've got in my toolkit in order to help me and change the frame of mind that I'm in is music. So I wrote in reaction to the pandemic because it was too dark for me, man. I didn't enjoy it. And I see a lot of bands and artists releasing records where they're talking about their new record is the most aggressive thing they've ever done, and this album is a wake-up call for the world, and I think, where do you get the energy? You know, I'd like, really, I was exhausted at the end of it. I wanted something that cooled me down rather than made things more chaotic. And that's not to say in the future I won't make chaotic music, but that's how I felt. I was exhausted. I was already dealing with a lot of chaos, and whenever I sat down in front of the computer to write and record music, I didn't want to hear more of that. I wanted less of it. Maybe I'm just getting older, man.
You wanted to simplify the world around you. That's what you wanted.
Well, yeah, I mean, that seems like a very bold assessment, because I don't think I have much control over the world around me, but I wanted to hear something that made things a little nicer for me, right? Yeah, and when I was 22, maybe it would have gone in the opposite direction, maybe a shitstorm or something. But at 50, after a pandemic and all the stuff and people dying and parents getting older and, you know, people around me are depressed and, you know, and all these things going on, I'm just like, man, I don't want to write shitstorm right now. Are you kidding me? Like, come on, dude. So,
You didn't want the Red Bull. You wanted more like a cup of tea.
yeah, yeah, because it's like it would be like being on a bunch of cocaine and drinking a Red Bull.
Yeah, or doing more cocaine.
Or doing more cocaine, maybe. But mm, but for me, I was like, no, man, I need to come down a bit because I'm already. I was thinking like there were certain points there. The stress was so much. I was thinking, oh my God, man, like I'm gonna have a heart attack. Like the amount of things, like moving and then moving again, and then all this stuff, and then this person going this direction, and this person dying, and these and all this stuff. It's like so fucking intense, right? And there's certain moments where I'm just like, I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating. It's like I'm trying to take care of my parents. I'm like, and I'm just like, God, I'm gonna have a heart attack, man. It's like it's too much. So when I started writing, I was just like, let's just bring it down. Let's just calm down a bit. And so it served a practical purpose for me. And it's funny because I'm doing interviews and people are saying, well, what's the message, or what's your metaphor? And I'm like, there's none, man. It was like I was beat. So here you
What
go.
you see is what you get. What
Yeah.
you see.
Yeah.
When it comes to a record like this one, like Lightwork, I'm sure every album comes with challenges. Do you look at challenges during the process of creating an album as a chance for you to grow as an artist, or just a nuance that just pisses you off and you wish you didn't have to?
Retroactively, I look at it as an opportunity to grow, but I think what is convenient is claiming any growth as like being smart enough to recognize it's happening. It's like, I knew this going in, that this was going to serve my purpose. And man, I wish I was that smart. I don't know until I'm finished what the purpose of it was. And because again, the function of music for me is maybe different than some others, but it helps me cope with my existence by writing music. It helps me cope, whether or not that was City, Synkestra, Ocean Machine, Empath, Snuggles, whatever. It's like, it's a coping mechanism, writing music for me. And so I don't know why I write. I don't know what I write about. I just write. And then I know when it's wrong. That's one skill that I think I have, is when it bugs me, I'm like, there's something wrong with that. And then I just keep picking away at it until it doesn't irritate me anymore. And then I let it go. And then at the end, I'm like, oh, okay, that song was about death. That song was about love. That song was about whatever. Like, I don't know at the time, but I think your subconscious works pretty much consistently. Even when you and I are freaking out, it's still processing. So in a sense, when I write music, it's almost like the subconscious is like, it's okay, man, we got this. Just keep panicking. You can do all that stuff you're doing. It's all good. We're just going to write. And then at the end, oftentimes people are like, well, what do you mean by this song? And I have to make up something. I'm like, oh, it's,
you don't want to disappoint them. They have certain expectations, right?
Well, yeah. And plus also in the past, the same process of writing unconsciously resulted in me writing a bunch of stuff that I was uncomfortable with. Right. Like, and then when people were really like hurt by it or bummed out by it for whatever reason, like close to me or whatever, and they're like, why did you do that? And it seemed like just pleading the fifth was not, it was like a pretty convenient way to get out of jail. You're like, I don't know, man, it's the process. I don't know. Right.
Yeah.
So now I think if pressed, I can give an answer. Because I don't think that I write things unconsciously now that I don't agree with anymore.
One of the great elements of this record is how I was able to find my way through it really easily. I felt like you did a wonderful job tying the songs kind of together, either seamless or with some breadcrumbs. Is that part of the original creative process, or do you tackle that aspect of putting the record together when it comes time to creating the track list and putting everything together?
Well, that's a thoughtful question, and I appreciate it. I mean, it's the same process as writing. Like, the whole thing is, I've said it before, and I will keep saying it, it's reductive process. It's not like the very first moment that I feel like writing a song, like this is a song about a cow, and it's going to be a white and black cow, and it's going to be, you know, it's going to have a bell around his neck, and it's going to be named Bossy Moo or whatever. It's like, it's not like that. It's like, oh, I just had an experience. I don't know what it is, but I know what it feels like. This riff reminds me of that. That riff doesn't remind me of that. This word seems to fit, and that image seems to fit, but this one does, and this one doesn't. And I just keep narrowing it down until at the end, it's not wrong. And it's the same thing with the sequence of the record. It's the same thing with the mix. Same thing with the artwork. It's really about removing the things that are incorrect, I guess. And sometimes, like, I'll end up with a record where I'm just like, oh wow, that's awful, but it's correct. You know, and it's like, I remember when I was finishing The Puzzle, I remember listening to that going, oh wow, this is a weird record, but that's wrong still, and that's wrong still, and this needs to be fixed, and we need to add this. So it wasn't this sense of creating something from the point of view of like full control. It's about intuition and following the creative compulsion in the ways that seems to, it's not therapy, that sounds cheesy, but it's like, it's a coping mechanism, I guess, right?
And as you're going through the process, let's blame it on the process. So as you're going through the process of,
Yeah.
of putting the record together, at what point in time did you discover, or maybe I discovered, and it's something that I took from the record, that this album had a very diverse soundscape, but a very balanced sound experience? Do you see that in the record?
I do, and Garth Richardson was involved, and he really helped in that regard because he has an objective point of view that allowed me to stay on track when sometimes I was sort of going off the rails. So I'm very thankful to him for that, and he put in so much work. We both did. I mean, it ended up being a co-production at the end, but I really, you know, I want to give him all the credit that he's due for the work that he did, because he really did a good job on it.
When you're looking at this record and you're looking at that diversity of that soundscape, what do you see as the nucleus? What can you take away as the nucleus of the sound of this album?
Another good question.
Oh, I hope I have more.
No, it's good. I hope I have answers that are like relevant. I think it's like an airy thing. I think that typically the records have an identity that I can distill into like a phrase or a term or an object, right? Like I could say Ocean Machine's clearly about water, and Physicist was about, you know, physics, I guess, on some level, and Infinity was about infinity. It's like it was all that. But there was like a nautical thing that kept coming up with Lightwork, that when I was talking to Travis, the artist, while we were making it, I couldn't understand why I couldn't shake that. We would try different images, we'd try different cover ideas and different completely different themes, but it always just kept coming back to something about a nautical theme, like something about a life preserver and an octopus and a lighthouse and man in a boat, and then from there, it's like anytime it got too serious, it also seemed wrong. So we kept bringing it back to you know, more of a whimsical look, like it's almost like cartoony sort of look. And then we kept trying different colors. We tried a really bold green, we tried a really bold orange, we tried and none of it fit. But then when finally we landed on this sort of really light sort of aquamarine color that was kind of like the air near the ocean, right? And that ended up being like the sonic identity. Then so when I started mastering with Troy, my buddy who masters, and we work really closely during the mix and master, I kept saying the high end should be like airier. It should be more like misty. It should be more like, you know, sea foam kind of thing. And I tend to work with people that think like that. Not exactly like that. I do tend to confuse both Travis and Troy by speaking like that, but we're friends and they're patient enough with me to tolerate it. But for me, it's always about sensations. And I think with Lightwork, it was really this kind of airy, sort of sea foamy sort of thing. Man, that is a hippie answer. Holy shit. Oh my God.
It's definitely a little bit of a hipster answer more than a hippie answer, but it's
But I will say though, man, it's the truth. So if that makes me either of those things, I'm gonna have to accept it.
So when you look at the light nature of the sound of this record, what is the more complex element that the album offers that may escape the more casual fan?
The effort that went into keeping it that way. Like that was incredibly difficult to make a positive statement during the period in which it was written and recorded. It was incredibly difficult because there was times where many times I was just depressed or like not coping well with it, right? So to keep the record on track and to keep a consistency between songs that had as its underlying nature a fairly blunt statement of optimism was really, really hard. And the fact that it seems like the last interview I did, the guy said, oh, it seems like it wasn't written during a pandemic. It seems like more of an effortless sound. And I'm like, well, that's what the hardest thing to do was to make something sound light and effortless at a period where it was anything but.
Wow, that's really interesting. I was expecting something completely different, but I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I have to ask you the most cliche question ever, which is, do you have a favorite song on this album that resonates perhaps a little bit deeper than others?
I like them all for different reasons. I'll always like Call of the Void because it's so simple, and I like that. And I really like Heavy Burden. I think that song is one of my favorites, and it's a strange one on the record because it's, by the time you get to that on the record, it's a lot of people it's like pretty complicated. So it's like, yeah, it's a bunch of sounds, right? But structurally and musically, Heavy Burden, I think, is something I'm actually quite proud of.
It's one of my favorites on the record.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I have to tell you this, listen to your music has never been easy to me, because I always feel like you create records that are way more intelligent than I am. So like that like that joke that just goes over my head, I always feel like it's not the record, it's me. I just don't get it. And I have a hard time understanding what the vision is and where you're coming from. It was completely different with this one. So I'm not saying you dumbed it down for me or for people like me, but do you see this album a little bit easier to digest from a listening point of view, to go from start to end?
Yeah, I got two thoughts. First off, I feel like I'm dumb as shit, dude. Like, I mean, I appreciate the fact that you think that, but man, maybe the music might be more clever, but I don't feel like I'm necessarily responsible for the music. I just write, right? But man, man, I mean, I appreciate the compliment, but no, man, I spend most of my time thinking that I'm dumb as shit. And then from the other point of view, dumbing it down, I told Garth really helped with that. He was like, it's too much, man. It's too complex. Like, bring this back, pull this out. And there's a couple moments where I got away with it, you know, Heavy Burden, Heartbreaker, whatever. But he really was conscious of the fact that it's fatiguing for people to participate in that stuff as consistently as I often ask the audience to do. But I will also, I jokingly say, defend myself, because I'm not meaning that, but I don't think about it. You know, when I write, I don't think about it. I don't think, oh, you know, it'd be really clever is if we did this, or, you know, it would really be interesting is if we alienated a good portion of the audience by doing this, right? Like, I mean, oftentimes my closest friend, buddy of mine, lives in New York, and he always, every time I send him a new record, he's like, why did you add that fucking part? Like, you lost me right there. And I say to him, I'm like, man, it's because I wanted to do that. It's not because I was trying to be provocative. It's not because I was trying to turn off the audience. I mean, why would I want to turn off the audience? It doesn't make sense. But I think that what always overrides my awareness of what the audience is going to perceive it as is how I feel about it. And maybe that's just me being selfish, but maybe it comes back to the fact that as a coping mechanism, if we want to be as simplistic about it as that, if that's what I feel like doing, I got to do it. Like, that's it. Maybe on some subconscious level, I'm just being an asshole, but, and that wouldn't surprise me either, but it's, I like to think that's not the reason. I like to think that I just write, and that's what happens, man.
That independence that you have, that creative independence that you have, if you look back at your career, at what point in time do you feel like you achieved it? You achieved that moment in time where you can make the record that you want to make, and you don't have to really be subjugated by those around you to make the record that they want you to make.
Ocean Machine. So I got offered a record deal for Ocean Machine by a label that I grew up loving. I was like a fan of them, and the owner of the record label loved Ocean Machine, and he said, we're happy to put this out and really promote it, but you have to take the word fuck out of bastard. And I was like, yeah, but that's the whole, it has to be there. But I think it was, I don't know, maybe it was, I don't know what it was, but might have been a religious thing, might have been a personal thing. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was. So I doubt it was either of those things, but maybe he just didn't want it to have a sticker on it. I don't know. And so he said, well, we can't put it out unless you take that word off. And so I said, no. And then I didn't get the deal. And then I said, fine. And I created my own label and then put it out and realized at that point, I'm like, oh, I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. But I think there's two things that come with that freedom. One is recognizing when you're saying no just to be petulant, because I think that's a tendency too. It's like you're a kid. All of a sudden you realize that the word no carries some degree of weight, and you start saying no to everything. Like no. So I think that you have to be careful when you get that freedom that you're not just being contrary for the sake of it. And for the most part, I think I'm pretty in control of that. But yeah, it's been since basically the beginning I've had that freedom.
So what's the biggest misconception about Devin Townsend?
That's a good question too. I don't know. I mean,
do you feel like at times you're misunderstood, and therefore there are some misconceptions about who you are as an artist?
I don't care. You know, maybe people think I'm crazy. Maybe people think I'm super smart. Maybe people think I'm being difficult for the sake of it. And I don't think I'm any of those things. I'm not crazy. I'm not, I'm maybe slightly above average intelligence. I don't go out of my way to like try to be provocative or say no to people or hurt people's feelings. I mean, I'm just trying to get through life. And I don't know, buddy. I think there's also this assumption that because you do the things that you do, you're trying to prove a point. Maybe that's it. Is every time I release something, it's its own identity because it was written during a period that seemed appropriate. But as an artist, that becomes your thing. You're like, oh, you released Alien by Strapping and Lad, for example. You must be that person. Okay, then you follow it up with Syncestra. Oh, you must be that person. And you fall, you know, I do empath and then follow it up with the puzzle and snuggles. And they're like, and so people's impression is like, this is confusing. You're either purposely trying to confuse us or you're crazy or something. But for me, my whole thought on that is, and I've said it before, I think it's much crazier to do one thing to the exclusion of everything else, because as a human being, the spectrum of emotions that we are meant to participate in is that broad. And maybe the fact that I never got super popular doing anything in particular musically means that I didn't have to adhere to the parameters of that genre. So if I had become super successful with like metal or something, it's like, well, you can't sing about your mother, and you can't sing about coffee, and you can't sing about love, and you can't sing, you know, you can't do any of that stuff. Then maybe that would have changed things. But because it was never really that, I was always kind of on the outskirts of whatever, like no one really cared. So if I did something like, it's just him being him. But what ends up being the misconception, I'm sorry to make a long story even longer, the misconception is that the fact that each record that I do is very different from the one before is an indicator of some sort of imbalance, rather than I think it's healthy for me. Yeah, that would be my answer.
I have one last question for you. I have a lot of friends in the music business that tell me that you are their biggest influence as far as music is concerned, for everything that they do. Like you're on a pedestal as far as they're concerned. So you are that much of an influence on a lot of artists today. But is there an artist today that influences you?
Tons. Oh yeah. I've always held to the thought that art exists separate from the artists, and so our job is to just actualize it. And so I'm comfortable with being viewed as a hard worker more so than I am of being like that's why when I say I just write the stuff and it comes out chaotic, it's not because I feel like I'm chaotic as much as that's what comes out of me, right? That's what you're an antenna for, I guess. And so I feel the same way about the artists that I care about as well. A lot of the artists that I listen to, I don't know what they look like, because so much of what I enjoy listening to is instrumental, ambient, weird shit, like just loops and humming sounds and strange sound design, right? Like that really appeals to me. And as a result, I prefer artists that have like names that aren't connected to them, you know, like a pseudonym in some way. And so there's multitudes of music that I'm inspired by and that I love, but I'm not too fussed about who made it, because for the same reasons I feel about how my creative process functions, I just write. That's what I do, just like what they do. And so I'm thankful to them that they put in the effort to actualize that piece of music that they heard. But it's not like it's not like I want to go to dinner with them or anything. It's just like, thanks for the music.
That's really interesting. Really interesting. Well, Devin, thank you very much. I've taken too much of your time, so I want to say thank you for taking the time today. This was a delight. I could not think of a better way of spending this time with anybody else than you. So thank you very much.
You're so welcome, my friend. I'm sure we'll talk to each other soon. And thank you again for the thoughtful questions.
Take care. All the best.
Bye-bye.